The wrench slipped from Marcus Rivera's oil-stained fingers for the third time that morning, clattering against the concrete floor of his garage with a metallic echo that seemed to mock his exhaustion. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving another dark smear across his already grimy skin, and stared at the ancient Honda Civic suspended above him on the lift. The car belonged to Mrs. Chen from down the street, and, like everything else that rolled into Rivera's auto repair these days, it needed more work than its owner could afford to pay for. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting dancing shadows across the cluttered workspace that had once been his father's pride and joy. Now it felt more like a mausoleum of broken dreams, filled with the ghosts of better times when customers lined up around the block and the cash register actually made noise. Marcus had inherited more than just a business when his father passed 2 years ago. He'd inherited a legacy of community service, a reputation built on honest work and fair prices, and a stubborn refusal to turn anyone away, even when their pockets were as empty as his own. The bell above the front door chimed, its cheerful jingle a stark contrast to the weight pressing down on Marcus's shoulders. He didn't look up immediately, focusing instead on the stubborn bolt that seemed determined to strip its threads rather than cooperate. Footsteps approached, light, careful steps that seemed to hesitate with each movement. When he finally glanced toward the sound, he saw her. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with dark curls framing a face that held more wisdom than any child should possess. What struck him most, though, wasn't her serious expression or the way she clutched a worn notebook against her chest. It was the wheelchair. The device looked like it had seen better decades, its chrome frame dulled with age and wear, one wheel squeaking with every rotation like a mouse caught in machinery. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying a determination that made Marcus set down his tools and give him his full attention. "Are you the man who fixes cars?" Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and crouched down to meet her at eye level, a gesture his father had taught him years ago. "I am. Name's Marcus. What can I do for you, young lady?" The girl glanced around the garage, taking in the organized chaos of tools, parts, and half-finished projects with the analytical gaze of someone far older than her years. "My name is Sofia Martinez, and I need you to build me a car." The request was so unexpected, so matter-of-factly delivered, that Marcus found himself suppressing a smile. "A car, huh? That's a pretty big project. What kind of car are we talking about?" Sofia opened her notebook, revealing pages covered with careful drawings and neat handwriting. She turned it toward him, pointing to a sketch that made his breath catch in his throat. It was a car, yes, but unlike anything he had ever seen. The design showed a sleek, low-profile vehicle with what appeared to be hand controls, a ramp system, and modifications that would make someone in a wheelchair drive independently. "I've been studying," Sofia explained, flipping through more pages filled with technical diagrams, measurements, and notes written in a child's careful script. "I know about hydraulic systems and hand controls and electronic interfaces. I know it's possible because I've seen pictures online. But the companies that make them charge like $50,000. And my mom—" She trailed off, her composure cracking for just a moment before she squared her shoulders again. "My mom works 3 jobs already." Marcus studied the drawings more carefully, his trained eye recognizing the hours of research that had gone into each sketch. The modifications weren't just wishful thinking, they were practical, well-thought-out solutions to real engineering challenges. This wasn't the fantasy of a child dreaming about toys. This was the work of someone who had identified a problem and systematically developed a solution. "Sofia, this is incredible work," he said, meaning every word. "But I have to ask, why me? There are bigger shops in town, places with more resources and newer equipment." Sofia's eyes, dark and serious, met his without wavering. "I asked around. Mrs. Patterson at the library said you were the only mechanic in town who still believes in helping people, even when they can't pay full price. She said your daddy used to fix cars for folks who needed them, not just people who could afford them." The mention of his father hit Marcus like a physical blow. Not painful, but profound. He could almost hear the old man's voice echoing through the garage. "Son, we don't fix cars. We fix problems. Sometimes the car is just the symptom." "Mrs. Patterson talks too much," Marcus said softly, but there was warmth in his voice. "Tell me about your situation, Sofia. What's going on?" Sofia closed her notebook and placed it carefully in her lap, her fingers tracing the worn cover. "I have spina bifida. I've used this wheelchair since I was 4. And it's okay, I guess, but—" She looked up at him with eyes that held dreams bigger than her circumstances. "I want to drive someday. I want to be able to take my mom to the store when she's tired, or drive myself to school when I'm older, or just go places without having to ask someone to help me all the time." She paused, gathering her thoughts, and when she continued, her voice carried the weight of someone who had spent long nights planning for a future she could barely imagine. "I saved up my allowance and birthday money for 2 years. I have $347. She reached into a small purse attached to her wheelchair and pulled out an envelope, thick with small bills. "I know it's not enough for a whole car, but I thought maybe you could teach me to help, and I could pay you a little bit each month until it's done." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't just sympathy, it was recognition. Here was someone who understood what it meant to work towards something that seemed impossible, to refuse to accept limitations that others tried to impose, to believe in solutions when everyone else saw only problems. He looked around his garage with fresh eyes, seeing not the struggles and the debt and the constant worry about keeping the lights on, but the tools and the knowledge and the space where miracles could happen if someone was brave enough to attempt them. The Honda Civic above him could wait. Mrs. Chen would understand. She always did. "Sofia," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion building in his throat, "I think we can work something out. But I need you to understand something first. This isn't going to be easy. We're talking about months of work, maybe longer. We'll need to find parts, figure out engineering challenges, probably fail a few times before we get it right. Are you sure you're ready for that kind of commitment?" Sofia's face lit up with a smile that transformed her entire appearance, erasing the serious lines around her eyes and revealing the 8-year-old she truly was. "Mr. Marcus, I've been getting ready for this my whole life." As if summoned by the moment, the garage door rattled open, letting in a shaft of afternoon sunlight that illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air between them. A woman appeared in the doorway, her silhouette backlit by the golden light. She was slight, with the same dark curls as Sofia, wearing scrubs that suggested she'd come directly from one of her jobs. "Sofia Martinez?" the woman called, her voice carrying the particular tone that mothers reserve for children who had wandered off without permission. "What did I tell you about bothering people at their work?" Sofia's confidence wavered the first time since she'd entered the garage. "Mama, I wasn't bothering him. I was making a business proposal." The woman, whom Marcus assumed was Sofia's mother, approached with quick, efficient steps. She was younger than he expected, probably in her late 20s, with tired eyes that still held traces of beauty and determination. When she reached them,
She placed a protective hand on Sofia's shoulder. "I'm sorry," she said to Marcus, her accent carrying the musical cadence of her heritage. "She's been talking about this car idea for weeks, and I thought she'd forgotten about it. I hope she wasn't bothering me at all," Marcus interrupted, standing to his full height. "I'm Marcus Rivera, and your daughter is quite possibly the most impressive young engineer I've ever met." Sofia's mother looked skeptical, glancing between Marcus and her daughter. "Engineer? She's 8 years old."
Age is just a number when it comes to problem solving. Marcus gestured toward Sofia's notebook. Take a look at her work. Go ahead. Reluctantly, Sofia's mother, who introduced herself as Sofia Martinez, took the notebook and began flipping through the pages. Marcus watched her expression change as she absorbed the depth of her daughter's research, the careful calculations, the detailed diagrams that revealed months of dedicated study. "Mija," Isabella whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Where did all this come from?" Sofia said simply, "The library and YouTube. And I asked Mr. Peterson at the auto parts store about some of the technical stuff. Mama, I can do this. We can do this." Isabella closed the notebook and looked at Marcus with eyes that held a mixture of hope and skepticism. "Mr. Rivera, I appreciate your kindness, but we can't afford anything like what she's describing. I work as much as I can, but between rent and medical expenses and everything else—" "Mrs. Martinez," Marcus said gently, "what if I told you that this project might be exactly what my garage needs right now? What if I told you that working with Sofia could teach me things I never knew about cars, about engineering, about what's really possible when someone refuses to accept limitations?" He paused, looking at both mother and daughter, seeing in them a reflection of his own family's struggles, his own father's belief that some things were more important than profit margins. "What if I told you that maybe Sofia isn't asking me for a favor? Maybe she's offering me one?" The garage fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic and the gentle squeaking of Sofia's wheelchair as she shifted in excitement. Isabella studied Marcus's face, searching for signs of deception or pity, but finding only sincerity and determination. "You're serious," she said finally. It wasn't a question. "Dead serious. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't charity and it's not a handout. Sofia comes here after school. She learns, she works, she earns this car through her own effort and dedication. I provide the workspace, the tools, the expertise, and the raw materials. She provides the vision, the determination, and the willingness to learn everything necessary to make it happen." Sofia looked up at her mother with eyes bright with possibility. "Mama, please, this is my chance." Isabella was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving from her daughter to Marcus and back again. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "What would something like this cost?" Marcus considered the question carefully. The truth is, he had no idea. The modifications Sofia was describing would require specialized parts, custom fabrication, and expertise he'd have to learn as he went. In the conventional world of automotive retail, the project could easily cost $50,000 or more. But this wasn't the conventional world. $347, plus whatever she can learn and contribute through her own work. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Rivera, that's not nearly enough to cover your costs, let alone—" Mrs. Martinez, let me worry about the costs. Right now, I'm more interested in the possibilities. He looked down at Sofia, who was gripping her notebook so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Sofia, are you ready to start learning how to build your future? Her answer came without hesitation, carrying the weight of dreams deferred and hope restored. Yes, sir. When do we start?
Marcus smiled, feeling something he'd almost forgotten existed stirring in his chest. The excitement of a challenge worth accepting, a problem worth solving, a story worth living. How about tomorrow after school? We'll start with the basics. Engine theory, hydraulic systems, and the fine art of turning impossible dreams into rolling reality. As the afternoon sun slanted through the garage door, illuminating the three of them in its golden light, Marcus realized that this moment would mark a turning point, not just for Sofia, but for all of them. He had no way of knowing that their simple partnership would set in motion events that would transform their lives in ways none of them could imagine. The broken-down Honda Civic still waited on the lift above them, but for now, it could wait. Sometimes the most important repairs were the ones that happened to hearts and dreams, and Marcus Rivera had just agreed to take on the biggest restoration project of his life. 3 months into the project, Marcus woke up to the sound of his landlord pounding on the apartment door above the garage. The rhythm was aggressive, insistent, the kind of knocking that meant business rather than courtesy. He glanced at the clock. 6:23 a.m. Nothing good ever happened at 6:23 a.m. "Rivera, I know you're in there." Frank Castellanos' voice carried through the thin door with the authority of someone who owned half the buildings on this side of town. "We need to talk." Marcus pulled on yesterday's clothes and opened the door to find Frank standing in the narrow hallway, dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place in the run-down building. Behind him stood a younger man with a tablet and the kind of predatory smile that made Marcus's stomach clench. "Frank," he said carefully, "little early for a social call, isn't it?" "This isn't social, Marcus. This is business. Overdue business." Frank pushed past him into the small apartment, his companion following like a well-dressed shadow. "You're 4 months behind on rent. 4 months. I've been patient because I knew your father, but patience doesn't pay my bills." Marcus had known this conversation was coming, had been dreading it for weeks as he watched his bank account dwindle to almost nothing. Every spare dollar had gone into research materials, component testing, and the 100 small expenses that came with Sofia's project. He told himself he could catch up once things stabilized, once he finished the Martinez project and could focus on paying customers again. But looking at Frank's expression, he realized he'd run out of time. "I know I'm behind," Marcus began, but Frank held up a hand. "Behind doesn't even begin to describe it. You owe me $6,800 in back rent, plus late fees and interest. And frankly, Marcus, I don't think you're going to catch up. This place," Frank gestured around the modest apartment and toward the garage below, "this place needs someone who can actually pay the bills." The younger man stepped forward, consulting his tablet. "Mr. Rivera, I'm Brad Morrison from Morrison Development. We've been working with Mr. Castellanos to identify properties with development potential in this area. Your lease is up for renewal next month, and we're prepared to offer a substantial buyout for you to vacate early." Marcus felt the floor shift beneath his feet. "Buyout? Frank, what's he talking about?" Frank had the decency to look uncomfortable, but his voice remained firm. "Marcus, hold this block is being redeveloped. Condos, retail spaces, upscale establishments that can actually pay their rent on time. I've got buyers lined up who want to transform this area, and your garage, well, it doesn't fit the vision." This garage has been here for 35 years, Marcus said, hearing the desperation creeping into his own voice. My father built this business from nothing. Our customers depend on us. Your customers, Morrison interjected with barely concealed disdain, drive 15-year-old cars and haggle over $10 oil changes. That's not the demographic this neighborhood is targeting. Marcus looked around his small apartment, seeing it through their eyes. The hand-me-down furniture, the technical manuals stacked on every surface, the coffee cups and takeout containers that revealed a life lived entirely on the margins. Then his gaze fell on Sofia's notebook, which she'd left behind the previous evening, open to a page covered with calculations for hydraulic pressure ratios. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" he asked, though part of him already knew the answer would be devastating. "Ideally, we'd like you out by the end of the month," Morrison said, tapping his tablet. "We are prepared to offer $15,000 for early evacuation plus forgiveness of all back rent. It's a generous offer, Mr. Rivera, especially considering your current financial situation." $15,000. It sounded like a fortune to someone drowning in debt, but Marcus knew it wouldn't last long. First and last month's rent on a new shop space, equipment moving costs, deposits for utilities. The money would evaporate before he could establish himself anywhere else. And that was assuming he could even find a suitable space at a price he could afford, which seemed increasingly unlikely in a city where every vacant building was being converted into luxury something or other. "I need time to think about this," Marcus said. "Of course," Frank said, though his tone suggested time was a luxury Marcus couldn't afford. "But Marcus, be realistic. You can't keep this place running on good intentions and borrowed time. Take the money, find something smaller, something you can actually afford." After they left, Marcus sat at his kitchen table staring at Sofia's notebook. In 3 hours, Sofia would wheel herself up the ramp with her usual punctuality, but Marcus could see immediately that something was wrong. Her normally bright expression was clouded with worry, and she seemed smaller somehow, as if the weight of her concerns had physically diminished her. "Mr. Marcus," she said without her usual cheerful greeting, "we need to talk." Marcus set down his tools and gave him his full attention, recognizing the serious tone he'd learned to associate with Sofia's most important announcements. "What's on your mind?" "My mom got laid off yesterday, from her main job, the one at the medical supply company. She said we might have to move in with my tia Rosa in Tucson. She said we can't afford to stay here anymore, and she can't keep working 3 jobs just to pay rent on an apartment that's too expensive anyway." The news hit Marcus like a physical blow. In all his worry about losing the garage, he hadn't considered that Sofia's family might be facing their own impossible choices. The project that was supposed to give her independence was becoming another source of stress for a family that already had more challenges than any family should bear. "When would you have to move?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Maybe next month. Probably next month." Sofia looked around the garage with the expression of someone memorizing details she might never see again. "Mama says she's sorry about the car project, that she knows how hard we've been working, but sometimes life doesn't care about your plans." Marcus felt something break inside his chest, not a dramatic snap, but a quiet crumbling that seemed to echo the sound of dreams deferred indefinitely. Here was an 8-year-old girl apologizing for her family's financial struggles, taking responsibility for circumstances completely beyond her control. "Sofia," he said carefully, "what if I told you that I might have a solution? What if there was a way to make sure your family could stay here and we could finish your car?" Sofia's eyes lit up with hope so bright it was painful to witness. Really? What kind of solution? Marcus realized he had no idea. He'd spoken without thinking, responding to her distress with a promise he had no way of keeping. But looking at her face, seeing the trust and hope that his words had kindled, he knew he couldn't take them back. Somehow, he had to find a way to make them true. Let me work on some details. But Sofia, I want you to know that we're not giving up on this project. We're not giving up on you. Do you understand me? Sofia nodded, but Marcus could see the weariness behind her hope. She'd already learned that promises could be fragile things. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the garage, not the familiar rattle of an aging customer's vehicle, but the smooth purr of a well-maintained engine. Marcus looked up to see a pristine black Mercedes sedan rolling to a stop in front of the bay doors. The kind of car that never needed his services, driven by the kind of person who wouldn't normally notice his existence. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to being the most competent person in any room. She was perhaps 45, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a precise chignon, and wearing a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. But it was her eyes that caught his attention. Intelligent, assessing, and somehow familiar. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying the subtle accent of someone who'd learned English as a second language but spoke it better than most native speakers. "I'm looking for Marcus Rivera." "That's me," Marcus replied, wiping his hands on a rag and wondering what someone driving a $100,000 car could possibly want with his services. The woman's gaze moved to Sofia, and Marcus saw something shift in her expression. Surprise, recognition, and something deeper that he couldn't immediately identify. "And you must be Sofia Martinez." Sofia straightened in her wheelchair, suddenly alert. "Yes, ma'am. Do I know you?" "Not yet, but I've heard a great deal about you." The woman approached them with measured steps, her attention focused entirely on Sofia. "My name is Elena Vasquez. I understand you're working on building a car." Marcus felt a chill of apprehension. Another professional, another expert come to explain why their project was impossible or dangerous or naive. He stepped slightly forward, positioning himself between Sofia and this new threat to their fragile progress.
"Mrs. Vasquez," he began, but she held up a hand with the kind of authority that made him stop speaking without conscious thought. "Please, let me explain why I'm here." Elena reached into her purse and withdrew a folder, which she handed to Marcus. 3 weeks ago, my daughter, Catalina, showed me a video she'd found online. It was posted by someone named Sophia_M Engineer and showed a young girl explaining the hydraulic brake modifications needed for adaptive vehicle control. Sophia's face flushed with embarrassment. "You saw my YouTube video? But I only posted it to get feedback on my calculations." "Your calculations were impressive," Elena said with a slight smile. "But what impressed me more was your presentation. You explained complex engineering concepts with a clarity that many professional engineers lack. So I did some research." She gestured toward the folder in Marcus's hands. "I learned about your project, about Mr. Rivera's garage, about your family's situation, and I realized that I had an opportunity to help with something that mattered. Marcus opened the folder and found himself staring at documents he couldn't immediately process. Corporate letterhead, legal language, and numbers that seemed too large to be real. Mrs. Vasquez, I don't understand what... I'm offering to fund your project. Complete funding, plus operational support from Mr. Rivera's garage, plus assistance with your family's housing situation. In exchange, I'd like to document the entire process, from conception to completion. The garage fell silent, except for the distant hum of traffic and the gentle ticking of cooling metal. Marcus read through the documents more carefully, his mind struggling to absorb what he was seeing. Purchase orders for specialized components, contracts with fabrication shops, insurance policies that covered experimental vehicle modifications, everything they needed to transform Sofia's dream from possibility to reality. "Why?" Sofia asked, her voice small with wonder. "Why would you want to help us?" Elena's professional composure softened slightly, revealing something more personal beneath the surface. "Because 23 years ago, I was a young engineer with big dreams and very few resources. Someone took a chance on me, invested in my potential when no one else would. That investment changed my life and eventually led to the success I enjoy today." She paused, looking around the garage with the same analytical gaze Marcus had seen her apply to Sofia. "But also because what you're attempting here isn't just about building a car. You're proving that innovation doesn't require corporate resources or institutional support. You're demonstrating that the most important breakthroughs often come from people who refuse to accept conventional limitations." Marcus found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Mrs. Vasquez, this is incredibly generous, but we can't accept charity. We need to earn this." "Mr. Rivera, I'm not offering charity. I'm proposing a partnership." Elena's tone became more businesslike, though warmth remained in her eyes. "I run a foundation that invests in innovative engineering projects with social impact potential. What you're doing here could revolutionize how we think about adaptive vehicle technology. The documentation and research from this project could help thousands of other families facing similar challenges." Sofia had been listening intently, her notebook balanced on her lap as she processed everything Elena was saying. "So you're not just helping me get a car, you're helping other kids like me get cars too?" "Exactly. Your project becomes a proof of concept, a demonstration that these modifications can be developed and implemented at a fraction of the traditional cost, but only if we document every step, every challenge, every solution." Marcus looked at the contracts again, noting details that had escaped his first reading. Not only would Elena fund the car project, but she was offering to cover his back rent, secure a long-term lease on the garage, and provide operational funding that would let him focus entirely on Sofia's project while maintaining basic business operations. "There has to be a catch. Nobody offers this kind of support without expecting something significant in return." Elena smiled, and for the first time since her arrival, she looked less like a corporate executive and more like someone who understood the weight of dreams deferred. "The only catch is that you have to succeed. You have to prove that this approach works, that the cost savings are real, that the safety standards can be met. If you fail, we all fail together." She looked at Sofia with something that might have been recognition. "But I don't think you're going to fail. I think you're going to build something remarkable, and then you're going to teach others how to build remarkable things too." Sofia was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between the contracts in Marcus's hands and the woman who had just offered to transform their lives. When she finally spoke,
Her voice carried the careful consideration of someone who'd learned that life-changing moments required thoughtful responses. "Mrs. Vasquez, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Do you have a daughter who needs a car like this? Is that why you really want to help us?" Elena's composed expression flickered, revealing a flash of something deeper, grief maybe, or regret. She was quiet for several heartbeats before answering. "I had a daughter. Her name was Catalina, and she would have been about your age now. She was born with spina bifida, like you. We spent years fighting insurance companies, researching adaptive equipment, dreaming about the day she'd be old enough to drive." The garage fell silent as Elena's words settled over them like a weight. Marcus realized why Sofia had looked familiar to her, why this project had captured her attention so completely. "She died when she was 6. Elena continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was sharing. "A complication from surgery that was supposed to make things easier for her. And I've spent the last 17 years trying to figure out how to honor her memory, how to make sure her dreams don't die with her." Sofia reached out and took Elena's hand, a gesture of comfort that seemed impossibly mature for someone so young. "I'm sorry about Catalina. She must have been really special." She was. She was brilliant and stubborn and absolutely convinced that she could do anything if she just worked hard enough to figure out how to do it. "She reminds me of someone I recently met." Marcus felt tears building behind his eyes as he watched these two people, one at the beginning of her journey, one carrying the weight of a journey cut short, connect across the space between dreams and loss. He realized that Elena wasn't offering them charity or even a business partnership. She was offering them the chance to carry forward something precious that had been interrupted, to prove that hope could survive even the worst kind of heartbreak. "If we do this," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "if we take your support and document everything and prove that this approach works, what happens after? When Sofia's car is finished and the project is complete?" Elena's smile returned, brighter now and tinged with something that looked like peace. "Then we start the next project, and the one after that. We build a network of garages and engineers and families who refuse to accept that impossible is permanent. We make sure that every child who dreams of independence has the resources to make that dream real." She looked around the garage one more time, taking in the scattered tools, the research materials, the whiteboard covered with plans and calculations. "But first, we build Sofia's car. We build it right, we build it safe, and we build it in a way that proves ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they have the support they need." Sofia was already reaching for her notebook, ready to dive into the practical implications of Eleva's offer. "When can we start? I mean, really start with actual parts and fabrication and everything." "How does Monday sound? I've taken the liberty of contacting several suppliers and fabrication shops. We can have the donor vehicle delivered by Wednesday and begin the initial modifications by the end of the week."
Marcus felt something shift inside him, a sensation he recognized from the day Sofia had first walked into his garage. But this time, instead of the terrifying weight of impossible responsibility, he felt the exhilarating lightness of impossible possibility. They were really going to do this. They were going to build not just a car, but a proof of concept that could change countless lives. As the three of them began discussing timelines and technical requirements, the garage filled with an energy that transformed the space. What had been a struggling auto repair shop became the birthplace of something revolutionary. What had been a desperate project undertaken by people with more heart than resources became a professionally supported endeavor with unlimited potential. But at its core, it remained what it had always been, a little girl's dream of independence supported by people who believed that dreams were worth fighting for, no matter how impossible they seemed. Outside, the sun was setting over a city that didn't yet know it was about to witness something unprecedented. Inside, Rivera's auto repair, three people who had found each other across the spaces between need and capability, loss and hope, dreams and reality, began planning the future. The real work was finally about to begin. This story is just getting started, and if you're enjoying Sofia and Marcus's incredible journey, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear that impossible dreams can become reality. As they talked late into the evening, mapping out every detail of their expanded project, Marcus realized that this moment would be remembered as the turning point, not just for Sofia's car, but for all of their lives. Elena's support had given them more than funding. It had given them permission to dream as big as their courage would allow. Sofia's notebook filled with new calculations, timelines, and possibilities that had seemed impossible just hours before. Elena made phone calls to suppliers and fabricators, her professional network mobilizing behind their shared vision. Marcus found himself thinking not just about one car for one remarkable girl, but about a garage that could become a symbol of what was possible when people refused to accept limitations. The project that had begun as an 8-year-old's impossible dream was becoming something much larger, a testament to the power of determination, the importance of community, and the revolutionary potential of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. But as the excitement of new possibilities filled the garage, none of them could anticipate the challenges that still lay ahead, or the way their success would attract attention from people who saw their project not as inspiration, but as a threat to the established order of how things were supposed to work. The easy part, finding resources and support, was behind them. The hard part, proving that their dream could become reality, was just beginning. 6 weeks after Elena's arrival, Sofia's car took its first breath. The moment came on a Tuesday morning, crisp with autumn air and electric with anticipation. Marcus had arrived at the garage before dawn, unable to sleep through the knowledge that today would either vindicate months of careful work or reveal flaws that could send them back to the drawing board. The modified Honda Civic sat in the center of the garage like a sleeping giant, its hood open to reveal the intricate network of hydraulic lines, electronic controls, and custom fabrications that had transformed it from a conventional vehicle into something unprecedented. Sofia wheeled herself up the ramp at exactly 7:15 a.m., 2 hours earlier than her usual arrival time. She'd convinced Isabella to drop her off before the first of Mother's 3 jobs, claiming she wanted to review the final system checks before the initial test. But Marcus could see the truth in her eyes. She was as nervous and excited as he was, unable to bear the thought of waiting until after school to witness this crucial moment. "Is Elena here yet?" Sofia asked, parking her wheelchair beside the work table where Marcus had spread out the final diagnostic checklists. "She's been here since 6, Marcus replied, nodding toward the office where Elena was setting up recording equipment and reviewing safety protocols. "I think she's more nervous than we are." Sofia opened her ever-present notebook and began reviewing the sequence of tests they'd planned. Over the past few weeks, her technical vocabulary had evolved from enthusiastic amateur to genuinely knowledgeable engineer. She could discuss hydronic pressure ratios, electronic control systems, and safety redundancies with a fluency that impressed even Elena's consulting engineers. "Mr. Marcus," Sofia said, her voice carrying an uncharacteristic note of uncertainty, "what if it doesn't work? What if we made a mistake somewhere and the car isn't safe? Marcus looked at this remarkable girl who had driven him to accomplish things he had never imagined possible, and realized that her question revealed something profound about how much their relationship had changed. 6 months ago, Sofia had been a determined child with an impossible dream. Now, she was his partner, his collaborator, someone whose opinion he valued and whose concerns he took seriously.
Sofia, do you remember what you told me the first day you came here? When I asked if you were ready for this kind of commitment? She nodded, a small smile breaking through her worried expression. I said I'd been getting ready my whole life. That's still true. We've been getting ready for this moment through every calculation, every test, every late night spent researching obscure technical specifications. If there's a problem, we'll find it and fix it. If there's a better way to do something, we'll figure it out. That's what engineers do. Elena emerged from the office, carrying a tablet and wearing the focused expression of someone about to document something historic. Are we ready for the initial systems check? Marcus took a deep breath and looked at Sofia, who nodded with renewed determination. We're ready. The first test was deceptively simple. Verify that all electronic systems powered up correctly and that the custom interface responded to inputs. Sofia positioned her wheelchair beside the driver's seat, while Marcus activated the modified entry system they'd designed, a combination of hydraulic assistance and reconfigured door geometry that allowed her to transfer from wheelchair to driver's seat with minimal effort. The transfer was smoother than Marcus had dared hope. Sofia settled into the custom-fitted driver's seat, her hands finding the modified controls with the familiarity of someone who'd spent weeks practicing every movement. The hand controls for acceleration and braking felt natural in her grip. The repositioned steering wheel required minimal effort to turn, and the array of switches and indicators was positioned exactly where her research had indicated they should be. How does it feel? Elena asked, recording every detail. Sofia was quiet for a moment, her hands moving across the controls with the careful attention of someone memorizing a moment they'd dreamed about for years. It feels like coming home. Like this is how driving was always supposed to feel for me. Marcus activated the car's electrical systems, watching as dashboard lights illuminated and the modified interface came online. Every indicator showed green. Every system responded correctly to Sofia's inputs. The months of careful planning and precise execution had resulted in exactly what they'd hoped for. A vehicle that felt natural and intuitive to its intended driver. Okay, Marcus said, his voice tight with excitement and anxiety. Ready for the big moment? Sofia's hand moved to the modified ignition system, a push-button start positioned where she could reach it easily. She looked at Marcus, then at Elena, then back at the controls that represented so much more than transportation. Ready, she said, and pressed the button. The engine turned over on the first try, settling into the steady idle that signaled everything was working exactly as designed. But more than that, Sofia was sitting in the driver's seat of a car she had helped design and build, her hands on controls that put her in complete command of a machine capable of taking her anywhere she wanted to go. The garage filled with the sound of tears and laughter and the quiet rumble of an engine that had just made the impossible real. "Oh my God," Sofia whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Oh my God, we actually did it!"
Marcus felt his own eyes filling with tears as he watched Sofia explore the controls, her face radiant with joy and wonder. Every switch, every lever, every carefully positioned element responded to her touch with the precision they'd spent months perfecting. Elena was recording everything, but Marcus could see that she was crying too, her professional composure overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. This wasn't just a successful engineering project. It was the fulfillment of dreams deferred, the proof that love and determination could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Sofia, are you ready to take her for a test drive? The question hung in the air like a challenge to the universe itself. They'd done countless system checks, verified every safety protocol, tested each component individually and in combination. But this would be the moment when theory became reality, when all their careful work would be validated or revealed as inadequate. Sofia looked at him with eyes bright with anticipation and just a hint of fear. You mean actually drive? Like really drive? Really drive. Just around the block at first, but really drive. Marcus opened the garage door, revealing the quiet street beyond. The sunlight streamed in, illuminating the car and its young driver in golden light that seemed almost supernatural. Sofia's hands found the controls with practiced ease, her movements fluid and confident despite the magnitude of the moment. "Elena," Sofia called, "are you getting this?" "Every second," her voice thick with emotion. Sofia engaged the modified transmission and the car began to move. Slowly at first, just a few feet forward and then back as she tested the responsiveness of the controls and the feel of the vehicle's movement. Her face was a study in concentration and wonder, every sense focused on the experience of commanding this machine she'd helped create. "It feels perfect," she said, her voice filled with amazement. "Everything responds exactly the way we calculated it would." Marcus walked alongside the car as Sofia maneuvered it out of the garage and onto the street. The moment when the car cleared the garage door and rolled into open sunlight was one he knew he'd remember for the rest of his life. Sofia Martinez, 8 years old, driving a car she'd designed and built, her face radiant with the kind of joy that comes from achieving the impossible. They kept the first drive short and simple, around the block at residential speeds, with Marcus jogging alongside and Elena following in her own car. But even that brief journey was enough to prove that everything they'd worked for was real and functional and safe. When Sofia guided the car back into the garage and brought it to a smooth stop, the silence that followed was filled with the weight of achievement. They had done something unprecedented. They had taken a child's dream and made it real through months of careful work, creative problem-solving, and absolute refusal to accept defeat. "How was it?" Marcus asked, though Sofia's expression had already answered the question. "Marcus," Sofia said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I just drove a car. I actually drove a car by myself, and it felt like flying." Elena approached with her recording equipment, but her professional focus had given way to something more personal. "Sofia, how do you feel about what you've accomplished?" Sofia was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the thoughtfulness that had characterized every aspect of their project. "I feel like we proved something important," she said finally. "We proved that just because something's never been done before doesn't mean it can't be done. We proved that kids can be engineers and that regular people can build extraordinary things if they're willing to work hard enough." She paused, looking around the garage that had become a second home to her. "But mostly, I feel grateful. Grateful to Mr. Marcus for believing in me, grateful to you for supporting us, grateful to my mom for letting me try something this big." Marcus felt his chest tighten with pride and affection for this remarkable young person who had changed his life in ways he was still discovering. "Sofia, you don't need to be grateful. You earned this, every bit of it. We all earned it, Sofia corrected. We did this together. Over the following days, word of their success began to spread. Elena's foundation published a detailed case study documenting the entire project, from Sofia's initial research through the final test drive. The technical specifications, cost analysis, and safety documentation proved what they'd all believed from the beginning, that adaptive vehicle modifications could be developed and implemented at a fraction of traditional costs without compromising safety or functionality. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Engineering forums discussed their innovative approaches to hydraulic control systems. Disability advocacy organizations hailed the project as a breakthrough in accessibility technology. Automotive publications featured stories about the 8-year-old engineer who had revolutionized adaptive vehicle design. But it was the personal responses that affected them most deeply. Emails from families facing similar challenges, calls from young people inspired by Sofia's achievement, messages from engineers and mechanics offering to volunteer their expertise for future projects. Marcus found himself staying late in the garage most evenings, not to work on cars, but to respond to inquiries about replicating their approach. Elena's foundation was flooded with requests for support from families who had seen what was possible and wanted to pursue similar projects. "We've started something bigger than we realized," Elena told them during one of their evening planning sessions. "This isn't just about one car for one remarkable girl anymore. This is about proving that innovation doesn't require corporate resources or institutional approval." Sofia had been listening to the adults discuss the growing interest in their work. Her notebook balanced on her lap as she sketched modifications for their next project. "Elena, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you first came here, you said this was about honoring Catalina's memory. Do you think she would be proud of what we've accomplished?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on something beyond the present moment. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of grief transformed into purpose. "I think she would be amazed," Elena said. "I think she would be proud that her dreams didn't die with her, that they grew into something that could help other children achieve their own dreams. And I think she would be especially proud of you, Sofia, for proving that determination and intelligence can overcome any obstacle." Sofia nodded seriously, then returned to her sketching. "Then let's make sure we don't stop here. Let's make sure every kid who wants to drive gets the chance to try." As autumn gave way to winter, Sofia's car became a regular sight in their neighborhood. She drove herself to the library, to the store with her mother, to school events that had previously required complex logistical arrangements. But more than providing transportation, the car had given her something invaluable: proof that she could tackle any challenge if she approached it systematically and refused to give up. The garage had been transformed as well. What had once been a struggling auto repair shop had become a center for innovative accessibility engineering. Elena's foundation had provided funding for additional equipment, and a steady stream of volunteers, retired engineers, automotive students, disabled veterans with technical expertise, had turned Rivera's auto repair into something unprecedented. Marcus found himself in the strange position of being recognized as an expert in adaptive vehicle technology, invited to speak at conferences, and consulted by major automotive manufacturers interested in incorporating their approaches into mainstream production. The garage that had once struggled to pay basic expenses now had a waiting list of families seeking custom modifications, and a network of partner shops interested in replicating their methods. But the most significant change was in Sofia herself. The serious, determined 8-year-old who had first walked into his garage had evolved into someone who carried herself with the confidence of someone who had attempted the impossible and succeeded. She spoke at engineering conferences via video link, corresponded with disabled young people around the world, and continued to develop new innovations for automotive accessibility. "Mr. Marcus," Sofia said one December afternoon as they worked on modifications for their third project car, "do you remember when I first came here and you asked if I was ready for this kind of commitment?" Marcus smiled, remembering that conversation and how impossible their current reality would have seemed at the time. "I remember. You said you'd been getting ready your whole life." "I think I was wrong," Sofia said, her tone thoughtful. "I hadn't been getting ready my whole life. I'd been waiting my whole life for the chance to get ready. There's a difference." She looked around the garage, taking in the bustling activity of their expanded operation. Elena coordinating with suppliers, volunteer engineers testing new modifications, families consulting with Marcus about their own projects. "All those years before I met you, I was just waiting for someone to tell me that my dreams were possible. But you taught me something better. You taught me that I didn't need permission to pursue my dreams. I just needed the courage to start working toward them." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever Sofia demonstrated how much deeper her understanding ran than her years should have allowed. "And what did you learn from that?" Sofia grinned, the expression transforming her serious face into something bright and mischievous. "I learned that impossible is just another word for something that nobody's figured out how to do yet, and I'm pretty good at figuring things out." As winter settled over the garage and the streetlights came on early, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. 6 months ago, he'd been a struggling mechanic facing eviction, and Sofia had been a determined child with an impossible dream. Now, they were partners in an enterprise that was changing lives and challenging assumptions about what was possible when people refused to accept limitations. Elena's documentation of their work had become a blueprint that families around the world were using to pursue their own adaptive vehicle projects. The foundation had already funded 12 similar initiatives, creating a network of garages and engineers committed to proving that accessibility didn't have to be expensive or complicated. But beyond the technical achievements and the growing recognition, what Marcus treasured most was watching Sofia drive. Every time she settled into the driver's seat of the car they'd built together, every time she navigated traffic with the easy confidence of someone completely in control of their vehicle, he was reminded of why they'd undertaken this impossible project in the first place. It wasn't about proving a point or advancing technology or even helping other families, though all of those things mattered. It was about giving one remarkable young person the chance to achieve her dreams on her own terms, and discovering in the process that dreams were contagious, that one person's refusal to accept limitations could inspire others to challenge their own assumptions about what was possible. Sofia Martinez had come to his garage asking for a car. But what she'd really been asking for was permission to be extraordinary. And in giving her that permission, Marcus had discovered something he'd never expected. That extraordinary was something any of them could choose to be if they were brave enough to start working toward it. That evening, As they locked up the garage and prepared to head home, Sofia paused at the door and looked back at the car that had started everything. "Mr. Marcus, what's our next impossible project going to be?" Marcus laughed, realizing that Sofia's question captured something essential about what they'd become. People who specialized in making impossible things possible, one carefully planned step at a time. "I don't know yet," he replied, "but I'm sure you'll think of something appropriately challenging." Sofia's smile suggested she already had several ideas in mind, and knowing Sofia, Marcus was certain that whatever she proposed next would be exactly the kind of impossible that they'd learned to call possible.
1 year later, Sofia Martinez stood before the largest gathering of automotive engineers she'd ever seen, her voice carrying across the auditorium of the International Conference on Adaptive Transportation Technology with the confidence of someone who had learned that age was irrelevant when you had something important to say. "When I first walked into Rivera's auto repair, I thought I was asking for a car. But what I was really asking for was permission to be independent. What I discovered was that I didn't need anyone's permission. I just needed the right tools, the right knowledge, and the right team." Marcus watched from the side of the stage, still amazed at how naturally Sofia commanded the attention of hundreds of professionals. At 9 years old, she had become one of the most recognizable voices in adaptive automotive technology, not because of her age, but because of the depth of her understanding and the practical impact of her work. The past year had transformed all of their lives in ways none of them could have anticipated. Sofia's car had just been the beginning, a proof of concept that had sparked a revolution in how people thought about accessibility technology. The detailed documentation Elena's foundation had published had become a blueprint used by garage mechanics, engineering students, and families around the world. "The most important thing we proved," Sofia continued, "is that innovation doesn't require expensive facilities or advanced degrees. It requires curiosity, persistence, and the willingness to learn from failure. Our garage didn't have million-dollar equipment or teams of specialists. We had library books, YouTube videos, and the determination to keep trying until we got it right." The audience, a mix of corporate engineers, academic researchers, and accessibility advocates, listened with the kind of attention usually reserved for keynote speakers with decades of experience. But Sofia had something many of them lacked: the credibility that came from having solved a real problem for real people using practical, replicable methods. Elena sat in the front row, recording everything as she had from the beginning. The foundation she ran had grown dramatically over the past year, funded not only by her personal resources, but by corporate sponsors and government grants attracted by the proven success of their approach. They now supported 43 similar projects across 6 countries, creating a global network of community-based adaptive technology development. "Our second car was for Tommy Chen, who was born without the use of his legs," Sofia explained, clicking to a slide that showed a modified pickup truck. "Our third was for Maria Santos, whose rheumatoid arthritis made traditional controls impossible to use. Each project taught us something new, and each solution we developed made the next project easier." Marcus thought about Tommy and Maria, both of whom were in the audience today. Tommy, now 11, had become Sofia's closest collaborator, his mechanical intuition complementing her theoretical knowledge in ways that consistently amazed the adult engineers who worked with them. Maria, despite being 63, had proven to be one of their most innovative problem solvers, approaching technical challenges with the perspective of someone who had spent decades adapting to circumstances others took for granted. But the most important thing we learned is that building cars was never really what this project was about. It was about proving that communities can solve their own problems when they have access to the right resources and support. The presentation concluded with a video montage of their various projects, dozens of people driving vehicles that had been modified in garages and workshops around the world, their faces bright with the same joy Sofia had experienced during her first test drive. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Marcus could see that many audience members were wiping away tears. During the question and answer session that followed, a corporate engineer from one of the major automotive manufacturers raised his hand. "Sofia, your work has been impressive, but how do you ensure quality control and safety standards when modifications are being done by individuals without formal certification?" Sofia had fielded this question many times before, and her answer had evolved through months of addressing similar concerns. "That's exactly the wrong question," she said politely but firmly. "The right question is, how do we provide training, resources, and support to ensure that people can develop these solutions safely and effectively?" She clicked to a new slide showing the certification program Elena's foundation had developed. "We've created a comprehensive training curriculum that covers everything from basic automotive theory to advanced hydraulic systems. We provide remote consultation, quality assurance inspections, and ongoing support. Our safety record is actually better than many commercial modification services because our teams care more about the outcomes." Marcus smiled, remembering when Sofia had been intimidated by the complexity of hydraulic brake systems. Now she was explaining advanced engineering concepts to professionals who had spent their careers in the field, and doing it with a clarity that made complex topics accessible to anyone willing to learn. After the presentation, they were surrounded by people wanting to know more about replicating their approach. Corporate executives offered partnerships, academics proposed research collaborations, and families shared stories about their own accessibility challenges. The conversation continued through the evening reception and well into the night. Miss Martinez approached a woman who introduced herself as Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the Department of Transportation. "I've been following your work for months, and I'm curious about scalability. How do you envision expanding these community-based solutions to serve larger populations?" Sofia, now comfortable discussing policy implications with government officials, pulled out her tablet and showed Dr. Walsh their latest research. "We've been working on a hub-and-spoke model. Major cities would have certified training centers that support smaller community workshops in surrounding areas. The technology gets distributed, but the knowledge and support remain centralized." Marcus watched this conversation with something approaching awe. 12 months ago, Sofia had been a determined child with a notebook full of dreams. Now she was discussing national transportation policy with federal officials, her insights carrying the weight of proven success. Elena joined their conversation, adding details about the Foundation's expansion plans. "We're also developing partnerships with vocational schools and community colleges. Students can earn certification in adaptive automotive technology while working on real projects for local families. It creates a pipeline of trained technicians while serving actual community needs." Dr. Walsh took notes throughout their discussion, asking detailed questions about funding models, quality assurance protocols, and regulatory compliance. By the end of the conversation, she was talking about pilot programs and federal partnerships that could transform their grassroots movement into national policy. "Sofia," Dr. Walsh said as their conversation concluded, "would you be interested in testifying before Congress about community-based accessibility solutions? We're developing legislation that could provide federal support for programs like yours." Sofia looked at Marcus and Elena before answering, the same careful consideration she brought to every important decision. "Dr. Walsh, I'll testify if you think it will help other kids get access to the resources they need. But I want to make sure we're not just talking about programs and policies. I want to make sure we're talking about real people solving real problems." After Dr. Walsh left, Marcus found himself alone with Sofia for the first time all day.
They stepped out onto the hotel balcony, looking out over a city that seemed full of possibility in the evening light. "How does it feel?" Marcus asked, with the kind of warmth that made him an endearing storyteller. "Being the face of a movement you started in my garage." Sofia was quiet for a moment, considering the question with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "Sometimes it feels overwhelming," she admitted with a genuine note in her voice. "People expect me to have answers for everything, and sometimes I'm still just figuring things out as I go along." She leaned against the balcony railing, looking surprisingly small despite everything she'd accomplished. "But mostly it feels right, like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Not just building cars, but showing people that they can solve their own problems if they have the right support." Marcus joined her at the railing, remembering the scared, determined 8-year-old who'd first wheeled into his garage. "Sofia, do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come to my shop that day? If you'd given up or chosen someone else to help you?" Sofia smiled, the expression lighting up her face in the way that always reminded Marcus why he'd agreed to take on her impossible project. "Mr. Marcus, I don't think I ever really had a choice. I needed that car, and you were the person who could help me build it. It was going to happen somehow, because it had to happen." She paused, then continued with the insight that consistently amazed him. "But I think the real question is, what would have happened if you'd said no? If you'd been too scared or too practical to take on something that crazy?" Marcus considered this, thinking about the man he'd been a year ago, struggling, defeated, barely keeping his father's garage operational. "I probably would have closed the shop within a few months, found a job working for someone else, maybe moved somewhere cheaper, given up on the idea that what I did mattered." "See?" Sofia said. "You needed this project as much as I did. You just didn't know it yet." Their conversation was interrupted by Elena joining them on the balcony, her phone buzzing with messages from people who'd attended Sofia's presentation. "We've got requests from 12 different countries for information about starting similar programs. The Japanese delegation wants to fund a pilot project in Tokyo, and there's a group in Germany that's already identified 5 families who want to participate." Sofia's eyes lit up with the excitement that came whenever she heard about their work spreading to new places. "Elena, do you think we're ready for that kind of expansion?" "I think we'd better get ready, because it's happening whether we feel prepared or not." Over the following months, that prediction proved accurate. The conference presentation had catalyzed interest from around the world, and the foundation found itself coordinating projects on 6 continents. Marcus discovered that his small garage had become the headquarters for a global movement, with engineers and families making pilgrimages to see where it all began. The garage itself had evolved beyond recognition, while somehow remaining essentially the same. Elena's funding had allowed Marcus to expand into the adjacent building, creating dedicated spaces for training, research, and project documentation. But the original bay where Sofia's car had been built remained unchanged, a reminder of how extraordinary things could emerge from ordinary places. Sofia's role had evolved as well. She spent 3 days a week at the garage working on projects and mentoring younger children who arrived with their own impossible dreams. The other 2 days were devoted to remote consultations, speaking engagements, and the kind of advocacy work that had made her one of the most recognizable faces in the accessibility community. "Mr. Marcus," Sofia said one October afternoon as they worked on their latest project, a modified motorcycle for a teenager who lost his legs in an accident. "Do you think we've accomplished what we set out to do?" Marcus paused in his work, considering the question carefully. Around them, the garage hummed with activity. Tommy and Maria collaborating on hydraulic modifications, Elena coordinating with international partners,
a film crew documenting their work for a major network special. I think we've accomplished something different than what we set out to do. We set out to build you a car. What we actually built was proof that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they refuse to accept limitations." Sofia nodded, making notes in the notebook that had evolved from simple research tool to comprehensive engineering journal. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about the difference between solving one problem and proving that problems can be solved." She looked around the garage, taking in the bustling activity that had grown from their simple partnership. "I think maybe the most important thing we did was show people that they don't have to wait for someone else to solve their problems. They can learn what they need to know and build what they need to build." Marcus smiled, recognizing in her words the wisdom that had driven their entire enterprise. "And what's the next impossible thing you want to tackle?" Sofia's grin suggested she'd been waiting for exactly that question. "I've been thinking about that too. What if we could develop modifications that would let people with visual impairments operate vehicles safely? Not full automation, but enhanced sensory feedback systems that could provide the information they need." Marcus felt the familiar combination of excitement and terror that came whenever Sofia proposed a new challenge that pushed the boundaries of what seemed possible. "Sofia, that would be incredibly complex. We're talking about completely reimagining how humans interface with vehicles." "I know. Isn't it exciting?" As autumn gave way to winter, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The struggling garage that had nearly been shuttered was now the heart of an international movement. The determined child who'd asked him to build her a car had become a global advocate for community-based innovation. The simple project that was supposed to give one girl transportation had evolved into proof that accessibility could be affordable, that innovation could be democratic, and that extraordinary was always within reach of those brave enough to pursue it. But perhaps most importantly, Sofia Martinez, engineer, advocate, and living reminder that impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been accomplished yet, continued to drive herself wherever she wanted to go in a car she'd helped design and build. And every time Marcus saw her behind the wheel, confident and independent and ready for whatever came next, he was reminded of why they'd undertaken their impossible project in the first place. Some problems were worth solving, not because they were easy, but because solving them proved that anything was possible when people refused to accept limitations. The legacy they'd built wasn't just about cars or accessibility or even community innovation. It was about proving that dreams were contagious, that determination was transformative, and that ordinary people could change the world one impossible project at a time. In Rivera's auto repair, where it all began, the tools were put away for another day. But the work would continue tomorrow, and the day after that, and for as long as there were people willing to believe that extraordinary was something any of us could choose to be. As Marcus locked up the garage that evening, he realized that their greatest achievement wasn't the car they'd built or the movement they'd started. It was the proof they'd provided that the distance between impossible and inevitable was often just the width of someone's willingness to begin. Sofia Martinez had taught him that lesson, and through their work together, they'd taught it to thousands of others around the world. Children who'd been told to accept limitations were now building solutions. Families who'd been priced out of accessibility were now creating their own alternatives.
Communities that had felt powerless were now discovering that innovation was something they could choose to pursue. The impossible had become inevitable, one project at a time, one family at a time, one dream at a time. And tomorrow there would be new impossibilities to tackle, new limitations to challenge, and new proof that extraordinary was always within reach of those brave enough to grasp it. The garage fell quiet, but it was the satisfied quiet of work well done and dreams achieved. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the street where Sofia had taken her first drive in the car that had started everything. But inside, the warmth of accomplishment lingered, along with the certainty that their most important work was still ahead of them. 5 years later, the documentary crew arrived at Rivera Auto Repair on a Tuesday morning in spring, their equipment trucks crowding the street that had once been quiet and forgotten. Marcus watched from the garage office as technicians set up cameras and lighting equipment, transforming the workspace where everything had begun into something that looked more like a television studio than an auto repair shop. "Mr. Marcus, they want to interview you first, then me, then Elena together," Sofia called from across the garage, her voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who had spent the past 5 years speaking to audiences around the world. At 13, she moved through the space with the fluid efficiency of someone completely at home among tools and machinery, her wheelchair as much a part of her as her ever-present engineering notebook.
As autumn gave way to winter, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The struggling garage that had nearly been shuttered was now the heart of an international movement. The determined child who'd asked him to build her a car had become a global advocate for community-based innovation. The simple project that was supposed to give one girl transportation had evolved into proof that accessibility could be affordable, that innovation could be democratic, and that extraordinary was always within reach of those brave enough to pursue it. But perhaps most importantly, Sofia Martinez, engineer, advocate, and living reminder that impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been accomplished yet, continued to drive herself wherever she wanted to go in a car she'd helped design and build. And every time Marcus saw her behind the wheel, confident and independent and ready for whatever came next, he was reminded of why they'd undertaken their impossible project in the first place. Some problems were worth solving not because they were easy, but because solving them proved that anything was possible when people refused to accept limitations. The legacy they'd built wasn't just about cars or accessibility or even community innovation. It was about proving that dreams were contagious, that determination was transformative, and that ordinary people could change the world one impossible project at a time. In Rivera's auto repair, where it all began, the tools were put away for another day. But the work would continue tomorrow and the day after that, and for as long as there were people willing to believe that extraordinary was something any of us could choose to be. As Marcus locked up the garage that evening, he realized that their greatest achievement wasn't the car they'd built or the movement they'd started. It was the proof they'd provided that the distance between impossible and inevitable was often just the width of someone's willingness to begin. Sofia Martinez had taught him that lesson, and through their work together, they'd taught it to thousands of others around the world. Children who'd been told to accept limitations were now building solutions. Families who'd been priced out of accessibility were now creating their own alternatives.
Communities that had felt powerless were now discovering that innovation was something they could choose to pursue. The impossible had become inevitable, one project at a time, one family at a time, one dream at a time. And tomorrow there would be new impossibilities to tackle, new limitations to challenge, and new proof that extraordinary was always within reach of those brave enough to grasp it. The garage fell quiet, but it was the satisfied quiet of work well done and dreams achieved. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the street where Sofia had taken her first drive in the car that had started everything. But inside, the warmth of accomplishment lingered, along with the certainty that their most important work was still ahead of them. 5 years later, the documentary crew arrived at Rivera's auto repair on a Tuesday morning in spring, their equipment trucks crowding the street that had once been quiet and forgotten. Marcus watched from the garage office as technicians set up cameras and lighting equipment, transforming the workspace where everything had begun into something that looked more like a television studio than an auto repair shop. "Mr. Marcus, they want to interview you first, then me, then Elena together," Sofia called from across the garage, her voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who'd spent the past 5 years speaking to audiences around the world. At 13, she moved through the space with the fluid efficiency of someone completely at home among tools and machinery, her wheelchair as much a part of her as her ever-present engineering notebook.
The garage itself bore only passing resemblance to the struggling shop where their journey had begun. Elena's foundation had funded a complete renovation and expansion, creating dedicated spaces for research, training, and the kind of precision fabrication work that their projects demanded. But Marcus had insisted on preserving the original bay where Sofia's car had been built, maintaining it exactly as it had been during those first tentative months when they had no idea whether their ambitious project would succeed or fail spectacularly. The documentary was the latest in a series of media projects attempting to capture the significance of what had grown from their simple partnership. The Sofia effect, as journalists had dubbed it, had transformed not just their lives, but the entire landscape of accessibility technology. Their community-based approach to adaptive vehicle modification had been adopted by organizations in 47 countries, creating a global network of garages, workshops, and training centers dedicated to proving that innovation didn't require corporate resources or institutional approval. "Marcus, are you ready?" asked Jennifer Chen, the documentary's director, and Tommy Chen's older sister. The family connection wasn't coincidental. Tommy's successful project had been one of the early proofs that their approach could be replicated, and Jennifer had been following their work ever since. Marcus adjusted his shirt and took a deep breath, still uncomfortable with the attention that came with being considered an expert in automotive accessibility. "As ready as I'll ever be." The interview began with familiar questions about the early days of the project, Elena's initial visit to the garage, and the challenges they had faced in transforming her notebook sketches into a functional vehicle. Marcus had told these stories hundreds of times over the years, but he tried to bring fresh perspective to each telling, knowing that somewhere in the audience might be another child with an impossible dream, or another adult wondering whether they had the courage to help make that dream real. "Looking back," Jennifer asked, "did you have any sense of how significant this project would become?" Marcus glanced toward the original bay where Sofia's car still sat, preserved as both monument and reminder. I knew it was important to Sofia, and that made it important to me, but I don't think any of us anticipated how hungry the world was for proof that ordinary people could solve extraordinary problems. He paused, considering the question more deeply. I think what we really proved was that innovation is democratic. You don't need advanced degrees or million-dollar facilities to develop solutions that can change lives. You just need curiosity, persistence, and the willingness to learn from failure. The conversation turned to the technical challenges they had overcome, the safety protocols they had developed, and the network of training centers that now taught their methods to mechanics and engineers around the world. Marcus found himself explaining concepts that once seemed impossibly complex, but now felt like second nature. Hydraulic control systems, electronic interfaces, safety redundancies that ensured reliability without compromising functionality. The most important thing we learned, Marcus said, was that the technology was never really the barrier. The barrier was the assumption that adaptive modifications had to be expensive and complicated. Once we proved that assumption wrong, everything else became possible. After Marcus's interview, Sofia took her place in front of the cameras with the easy grace of someone who had grown up in the public eye. At 13, she had evolved from the determined 8-year-old who had first walked into the garage into someone who carried herself with the confidence of someone who had proven that age was irrelevant when you had something important to contribute.
Sofia, Jennifer began, you've become one of the most recognizable advocates for accessibility technology in the world. How has that changed your relationship with the work you do here? Sofia considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had characterized every aspect of their collaboration. I think the advocacy work and the engineering work feed each other, she said. When I'm speaking at conferences or testifying before legislators, I'm sharing what we've learned from building actual solutions for real people. And when I'm here in the garage working on projects, I'm informed by all the conversations I've had with families and policymakers around the world. She gestured toward the various workstations where current projects were in development. A modified van for a family with multiple disabled children, an adaptive sports car for a veteran who'd lost the use of his legs, a completely reimagined interface for someone with limited upper body mobility. But the real work still happens here, Sofia continued. Everything else, the speaking, the advocacy, the policy development, that's just about creating conditions where more garages like this one can exist. The actual innovation, the actual problem solving, that happens when engineers and families work together to build solutions that didn't exist before. Jennifer asked about Sofia's future plans, a question that had become increasingly complex as opportunities multiplied. Universities had offered full scholarships, corporations had proposed internships and consulting arrangements, and government agencies had extended invitations for her to join various advisory committees. I've been accepted to MIT for their early admission program, but I've deferred enrollment for 2 years. I want to spend more time here, working on projects and training the next generation of community engineers. The academic knowledge will always be available, but the opportunity to shape how this movement evolves, that's happening now. She looked around the garage, taking in the bustling activity that had grown from their simple partnership. Besides, the best engineering education is solving real problems for real people. I'm getting that education every day right here. The joint interview with Elena provided an opportunity to discuss the broader impact of their work and the Foundation's role in supporting similar projects around the world. Elena had evolved from a grieving mother seeking to honor her daughter's memory into one of the most influential figures in accessibility technology. Her foundation now managing an annual budget of over $50 million dedicated to community-based innovation. The most surprising thing, Elena said, has been discovering how many communities were ready for this approach. We thought we'd have to convince people that they could develop their own solutions, but it turned out they were just waiting for permission and support. She shared statistics that illustrated the scope of their impact. Over 3,000 adaptive vehicles built using their methods, certification programs established in 67 countries, and a network of community workshops that had collectively trained more than 15,000 mechanics and engineers in accessibility technology. But the numbers don't capture the real significance, Elena continued. What we've really accomplished is proving that innovation can be democratic, that the distance between having a problem and developing a solution can be much shorter than anyone imagined. Jennifer asked about Elena's future plans, particularly regarding the policy changes that had emerged from their advocacy work. Several countries had adopted legislation requiring insurance coverage for community-built adaptive modifications, and the United States Congress was considering similar measures. Policy is important, Elena said, but it's not the heart of what we do. The heart is the relationship between people who need solutions and people who have the skills to help develop them. Policy can make those relationships easier to form and sustain, but it can't replace the human connections that make innovation possible. As the filming concluded, Marcus found himself walking through the garage with Sofia, taking inventory of current projects and planning the work that would occupy them over the coming weeks. The space hummed with activity, volunteer engineers collaborating on design challenges, families learning about vehicle systems, young people discovering that engineering could be a tool for social change. Sofia, Marcus said, do you ever think about what would have happened if things had gone differently? If you'd never come to the garage, or if I'd said no to your project?
Sofia smiled, the expression lighting up her face in the way that always reminded Marcus of why he'd agreed to take on her impossible challenge. Mr. Marcus, I don't think that was ever really a possibility. I needed that car, and you were the person who could help me build it. It was always going to happen somehow. She paused, then continued with the insight that had consistently amazed him throughout their partnership. But I think the more interesting question is, what would have happened if we'd stopped after building just one car? If we'd been satisfied with solving just my problem, instead of realizing we were proving something bigger? Marcus considered this, thinking about all the projects that had grown from their initial collaboration. The training programs, the policy changes, the global network of community workshops that continued to expand and evolve. I think, he said slowly, that we would have missed the most important part. The car was just the beginning. The real achievement was proving that extraordinary was something any of us could choose to be. That evening, after the documentary crew had packed their equipment and the garage had returned to its normal rhythm, Sofia, Marcus, and Elena gathered in the office to review plans for their next major initiative, a partnership with the United Nations to establish accessibility innovation centers in developing countries. The proposal is ambitious, Elena said, spreading documents across the desk. 25 centers across 5 continents, each one equipped and staffed to support community-based adaptive technology development. But the early responses have been encouraging. Sofia studied the technical specifications, her practiced eye evaluating the equipment lists and training curricula that would form the foundation of each center. The approach is solid, but I think we need to be more intentional about knowledge transfer.
Each center shouldn't just serve its local community. It should become a resource for surrounding regions. Marcus watched this conversation with something approaching wonder. 5 years ago, Sofia had been a determined child with a notebook full of dreams. Now she was discussing international development strategy with the kind of expertise that came from years of turning theoretical knowledge into practical solutions. "What's the timeline?" Marcus asked. "Optimistically 18 months for the first 5 centers, then expansion based on what we learn from those initial implementations. But realistically, we're looking at a 3 to 5 year development cycle." Sofia was already sketching modifications to the proposed center designs, her mind working through the practical challenges of replicating their approach in different cultural and economic contexts. "We'll need to adapt the training curricula for different educational backgrounds and language barriers, and the equipment specifications will have to account for varying levels of infrastructure development." As they worked through the evening, refining plans and identifying potential obstacles, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The struggling garage that had nearly been shuttered was now the headquarters for a global movement. The determined child who'd asked him to build her a car had become an internationally recognized advocate for community-based innovation. The simple project that was supposed to give one girl transportation had evolved into proof that accessibility could be affordable, that innovation could be democratic, and that extraordinary was always within reach of those brave enough to pursue it. But perhaps most importantly, Sofia Martinez, engineer, advocate, and living reminder that impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been accomplished yet, continued to drive herself wherever she wanted to go in the car they'd built together. And every time Marcus saw her behind the wheel, confident and independent and ready for whatever came next, he was reminded of why they'd undertaken their impossible project in the first place.
Outside, the city continued its normal rhythm, unaware that in a small auto repair shop that had become something much larger, 3 people were planning the next phase of a revolution that had begun with one child's refusal to accept limitations. The work would continue tomorrow, and the day after that, and for as long as there were people willing to believe that extraordinary was something any of us could choose to be. Problems would be solved, dreams would be built, and proof would be provided again and again that the distance between impossible and inevitable was often just the width of someone's willingness to begin. In Rivera's auto repair, where it all started, the tools were put away for another day. But the legacy they represented, the proof that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they refused to accept limitations, would continue to grow and spread and inspire others to attempt their own impossible projects. Sofia Martinez had taught them all that lesson, and through their work together, they'd taught it to thousands of others around the world. The impossible had become inevitable, one project at a time, one family at a time, one dream at a time. And somewhere in a garage, or workshop, or community center they'd never heard of, another child was probably sketching impossible dreams in a notebook, getting ready to prove that extraordinary was something any of us could choose to be. The revolution would continue because revolutions built on love and determination and the absolute refusal to accept limitations always did. 10 years later.
The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in early June, hand-delivered by a courier who seemed almost apologetic for interrupting the usual rhythm of work at Rivera's auto repair. Marcus recognized the elegant stationery immediately, the kind of formal correspondence that typically carried news of awards, speaking engagements, or policy developments that had grown from their work. But this letter was different. The return address bore the seal of the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, and Marcus felt his hands tremble slightly as he broke the wax seal and unfolded the heavy paper within. "Sofia!" he called across the garage, his voice carrying a note of amazement that made her look up immediately from the project she was supervising. A revolutionary new adaptive interface that would allow people with limited mobility to control vehicles through eye movement and voice commands. At 18, she had grown into someone who commanded respect not because of her age or disability, but because of the depth of her expertise and the practical impact of her innovations. She had completed her accelerated degree at MIT while maintaining her work at the garage, somehow managing to excel in theoretical engineering while never losing touch with the hands-on problem-solving that had always driven her passion. "What is it, Mr. Marcus?" she asked, wheeling herself over with the fluid efficiency that had always characterized her movement.
Marcus held out the letter, his voice catching as he read the formal language aloud. The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences has the honor to announce that the 2029 Nobel Prize in Engineering Sciences has been awarded jointly to Sofia Martinez and Marcus Rivera for their revolutionary contributions to accessibility technology and their demonstration that community-based innovation can address complex engineering challenges. The garage fell silent, except for the distant hum of equipment and the gentle sound of Sofia's notebook falling to the floor as she absorbed the magnitude of what Marcus had just read. "The Nobel Prize," Sofia whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "They're giving us the Nobel Prize." Elena emerged from the office where she'd been coordinating with their partners in Mumbai, her expression shifting from professional focus to amazement as she registered the expressions on their faces. "What's happened?" Marcus handed her the letter, watching as she read through the formal announcement and the detailed citation that followed. The Academy had recognized not just their technical innovations, but their broader impact on how societies approached accessibility challenges, their proof that innovation could be democratized, and their creation of a global network that had fundamentally changed how adaptive technology was developed and distributed. "This is," Elena began, then stopped, searching for words adequate to the moment. "This is recognition that what you've accomplished goes far beyond engineering. You've changed how the world thinks about disability, innovation, and community empowerment." Sofia was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving around the garage that had been her second home for a decade. The space had evolved dramatically over the years. State-of-the-art fabrication equipment occupied areas that once held aging automotive parts. International video conferences connected them daily with workshops on 6 continents, and a steady stream of engineers, students, and families ensured that the garage hummed with constant activity. "Mr. Marcus," Sofia said finally, "do you remember what you told me the first day I came here, when I asked if you could build me a car?" Marcus smiled, the memory as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. "I told you that some things were more important than profit margins. You told me something else too. You said we don't fix cars, we fix problems, and sometimes the car is just the symptom."
Sofia's voice carried the weight of someone who had spent a decade discovering the deeper truth in those words. I don't think we ever imagined that fixing my problem would lead to fixing so many others. The afternoon that followed was a blur of phone calls, interviews, and congratulations from colleagues around the world. The Nobel Committee had scheduled the formal announcement for the following day, but word leaked quickly through the engineering community, and their phones began ringing with requests for comment from journalists, colleagues, and the thousands of people whose lives had been touched by their work. Sofia Martinez arrived at the garage shortly after the news broke, her face radiant with pride and amazement. At 38, she had evolved from overwhelmed single mother to successful advocate in her own right, using her experience navigating accessibility challenges to help other families access the resources they needed. "Mija," she said, embracing Sofia with tears in her eyes, "your father would be so proud." Sofia had rarely spoken about her father, who had died when she was very young, but Marcus could see the emotion in her eyes as she returned to her mother's embrace. "Mama, none of this would have been possible without you. You're the one who taught me that limitations were just starting points for finding solutions."
The celebration that evening was held in the garage itself, surrounded by the tools and projects that had made everything possible. Tommy Chen, now a successful engineer in his own right, flew in from Seattle, where he'd been establishing a new training center. Maria Santos arrived with her entire extended family, the modified pickup truck they'd built for her still serving as her primary transportation after 8 years. Elena stood before the gathered crowd, engineers, families, volunteers, and journalists from around the world, to offer remarks that captured the significance of the moment. "When I first walked into this garage 5 years ago," she began, "I thought I was supporting one remarkable girl's dream of independence. What I discovered was that I was witnessing the beginning of a revolution that would transform how we think about innovation, accessibility, and human potential." She gestured towards Sofia, who sat beside Marcus at a table constructed from the same workbench where they'd planned her first car. The Nobel Committee cited Sofia and Marcus for their technical contributions, but I believe their greatest achievement was proving that extraordinary is something any of us can choose to be. Sofia had been asked to speak, but she demurred, preferring instead to move through the crowd and talk individually with the people whose lives had been touched by their work. Marcus watched her engage in animated conversations about hydraulic systems with 8-year-old aspiring engineers, discuss policy implications with government officials, and laugh with friends who had supported her journey from the beginning. Later that evening, after the celebration had wound down and the garage had returned to its normal quiet, Marcus found Sofia standing beside her original car, the vehicle that had started everything, now preserved as both a symbol and reminder of what was possible when people refused to accept limitations. "How does it feel?" Marcus asked, the same question he'd posed after her first test drive all those years ago. Sofia was quiet for a moment, her hand resting on the steering wheel of the car they'd built together. "It feels like the beginning," she said finally. "Like everything we've accomplished so far was just preparation for whatever comes next." She looked around the garage, taking in the evidence of a decade's worth of innovation and collaboration. "Mr. Marcus, do you think we've proven what we set out to prove?" Marcus considered the question carefully. Around them, the walls were covered with photographs and articles documenting their work, families celebrating successful projects, engineers implementing their methods in new contexts, policymakers citing their research in legislation that had made accessibility more affordable and available. "I think we've proven something more important than what we set out to prove," he said. We set out to prove that you could drive. What we actually proved was that the only real limitations are the ones we accept without questioning." Sofia nodded, her expression thoughtful. "And what's the next limitation we should question?" Marcus laughed, recognizing in her question the same insatiable curiosity that had driven their entire partnership. "Sofia, I learned a long time ago that you're always 3 steps ahead of me when it comes to identifying the next impossible thing we should attempt." Sofia's grin suggested he was absolutely right. "I've been thinking about space accessibility. What if we could develop adaptive systems for spacecraft? What if disability wasn't a barrier to space exploration, but actually an advantage because people with disabilities are already experts at adapting to challenging environments?" Marcus felt the familiar combination of excitement and terror that came whenever Sofia proposed a challenge that pushed the boundaries of what seemed possible. "Sofia, that would require us to essentially reinvent aerospace engineering from the ground up." "I know. Isn't it exciting?" As they stood together in the garage where everything had begun, Marcus realized that their greatest achievement wasn't the Nobel Prize, or the global network they'd built, or even the thousands of lives they'd changed. Their greatest achievement was the proof they'd provided that impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been accomplished yet.
The letter from the Nobel Committee lay on the workbench beside them, formal recognition of work that had grown from the simple belief that everyone deserved the chance to pursue their dreams. But more important than any award was the knowledge that their work would continue, in garages and workshops around the world, wherever people gathered to prove that extraordinary was something any of us could choose to be. Sofia Martinez had come to his garage asking for a car, but what she'd really been asking for was permission to be extraordinary. And in giving her that permission, Marcus had discovered that extraordinary was contagious, that one person's refusal to accept limitations could inspire others to challenge their own assumptions about what was possible. 6 months later. The ceremony in Stockholm was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. The concert hall gleamed with centuries of tradition and gravitas, filled with dignitaries, scientists, and families who had traveled from around the world to witness the presentation of the Nobel Prizes. Marcus tugged at his formal attire, still uncomfortable with the pomp and ceremony that accompanied recognition at this level. Beside him, Sofia sat with the composed confidence of someone who had grown accustomed to speaking before distinguished audiences. At 18, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had proven that age was irrelevant when you had something important to contribute. Her acceptance speech, which she'd practiced in the garage while working on their latest project, was ready to deliver to the most prestigious scientific audience in the world. In calling Sofia Martinez and Marcus Rivera, the presenter announced, his voice carrying across the silent hall, the committee recognizes not only their revolutionary contributions to adaptive automotive technology, but their demonstration that innovation thrives when communities are empowered to solve their own challenges. As they made their way to the stage, Marcus caught sight of Isabella in the audience, her face radiant with pride. Beside her sat Elena, whose foundation had grown into one of the most influential forces in accessibility technology worldwide. Tommy Chen was there with his family, along with Maria Santos and dozens of others whose lives had been transformed by work that had begun in a small garage with one impossible dream. Sofia's acceptance speech was everything Marcus had hoped it would be: gracious, thoughtful, and focused on the people and principles that had made their work possible. This recognition belongs not to Marcus and me alone, but to every person who has refused to accept that limitations are permanent. It belongs to every family who has chosen to pursue solutions rather than accept problems. It belongs to every community that has discovered innovation is something they can choose to practice. She paused, looking out at an audience that included some of the world's most accomplished scientists and engineers. When I first wheeled into Rivera's auto repair 10 years ago, I thought I was asking for help with transportation. What I was really asking for was permission to be extraordinary. And in giving her that permission, Marcus had discovered that extraordinary was contagious,
that one person's refusal to accept limitations could inspire others to challenge their own assumptions about what was possible. The applause that followed was sustained and heartfelt, but Marcus found himself focusing not on the recognition, but on the words Sofia had chosen. Even in this moment of ultimate professional recognition, she remained focused on the human connections and community partnerships that had made everything possible. Marcus's own remarks were brief, focusing on the lessons he had learned from working with Sofia and the thousands of families they had served over the years.
"The most important thing we've discovered," he said, "is that the distance between having a problem and developing a solution is often much shorter than anyone imagines. What's required isn't advanced technology or unlimited resources. What's required is the willingness to begin, the persistence to continue, and the humility to learn from both success and failure." He looked out at the audience, thinking about all the garages and workshops around the world where people were at this very moment, proving that ordinary individuals could accomplish extraordinary things. "Sofia taught me that impossible is just another word for something that hasn't been accomplished yet. Our hope is that the work we've done will inspire others to attempt their own impossible projects, to refuse to accept limitations, and to discover that extraordinary is always within reach of those brave enough to grasp it." The reception following the ceremony was an opportunity to meet with colleagues from around the world, to share updates on ongoing projects, and to discuss the future directions of their work. Representatives from space agencies, medical device companies, and educational institutions approached with partnership proposals and collaborative opportunities that would have seemed fantastical just a decade earlier. But the conversation that meant the most to Marcus came from a 12-year-old girl named Anna Petrov, whose family had traveled from rural Russia to attend the ceremony. Anna had been born with muscular dystrophy, and her family had used the open-source plans from Sofia's project to build an adaptive vehicle that allowed her to participate in her community's activities. "Miss Sofia," Anna said in carefully practiced English, "I have been studying your work for 2 years. I want to be an engineer like you." Sofia knelt beside Anna's wheelchair, giving her the same careful attention Marcus remembered from their first meeting in his garage. "Anna, you're already an engineer. You identified a problem, researched solutions, and worked with your family to build something that didn't exist before. That's exactly what engineers do." Anna's face lit up with the kind of joy that made all the technical challenges and long hours worthwhile. "Really? I'm really an engineer?" "You are really an engineer," Sofia confirmed. "And if you keep studying and keep building and keep solving problems, you'll become an even better engineer than I am." As Marcus watched this interaction, he realized that their greatest legacy wasn't the vehicles they'd built or the recognition they'd received. Their greatest legacy was the proof they'd provided that extraordinary was democratic, that anyone, regardless of age or circumstances, could choose to pursue impossible dreams and discover that impossible was just another word for something that hadn't been accomplished yet. The email arrived on a Monday morning, 15 years after Sofia had first wheeled into Rivera's auto repair with her notebook full of impossible dreams. Marcus, now recognized as one of the world's leading experts in community-based innovation, read the message twice before calling Sofia to share the news. "The International Space Station is requesting a consultation," he announced when Sofia answered her phone from the orbital laboratory where she was spending 6 months as the first disabled astronaut, proving that space exploration could benefit from the adaptability and problem-solving skills that came with navigating accessibility challenges. "What kind of consultation?" Sofia asked, her voice clear despite the 250-mile distance between Earth and her current location. "They want us to design adaptive systems for the next generation of spacecraft.
Apparently, NASA has realized that people with disabilities might actually be ideal astronauts because they're already experts at adapting to challenging environments. Sofia's laughter carried across the vast distance between them, filled with the same joy and anticipation that had characterized their partnership from the beginning. Mr. Marcus, it sounds like we have our next impossible project. Marcus looked around the garage where everything had begun, now the headquarters for a global network that spanned 6 continents and had transformed countless lives. The original bay where Sofia's car had been built remained unchanged, a reminder of how extraordinary things could emerge from ordinary places when people refused to accept limitations. Sofia, are you ready for this kind of commitment?
Her answer came without hesitation, carrying the weight of 15 years of proven success and the promise of challenges yet to be conquered. Mr. Marcus, I've been getting ready for this my whole life. Outside, the world continued its normal rhythm, unaware that in a small auto repair shop that had become something much larger, the next chapter of an extraordinary story was about to begin. The impossible was about to become inevitable once again, one carefully planned step at a time. This cinematic story chronicles the extraordinary partnership between Marcus Rivera, a struggling garage owner, and Sofia Martinez, an 8-year-old girl with spina bifida who dreams of driving independently. What begins as one child's impossible request becomes a global movement that revolutionizes accessibility technology and proves that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things. Through 6 carefully crafted sections, we witness their journey from first meeting through the technical challenges of building an adaptive vehicle, the arrival of mysterious benefactor Elena Vasquez, whose own daughter's memory drives her support, the triumphant success of their project, and ultimately the global impact of their community-based approach to innovation. The story balances technical detail with emotional depth, showing how determination, community support, and the refusal to accept limitations can transform not just individual lives, but entire approaches to solving complex problems. Sofia's evolution from determined child to internationally recognized advocate parallels Marcus's transformation from struggling mechanic to expert in adaptive technology, while Elena finds healing through supporting others' dreams. The epilogue reveals the lasting legacy of their work, a global network of community workshops, policy changes that make accessibility more affordable, and proof that innovation can be democratic when people have the courage to pursue seemingly impossible goals. At its heart, this is a story about the power of believing in someone else's dream and discovering that extraordinary is something any of us can choose to be.